Welcome everyone. I'm Paige Lorraine and this is Meghan Frazier, and we're instructional coaches with the North Carolina New Teacher Support Program. Today we'll be discussing how to build social bonds and inclusion in a digital learning environment. So we're going to have a lot of opportunities today to reflect on our own classrooms and how we build social bonds and inclusion opportunities. To capture your thoughts, please use the interactive handout that's linked at the bit.ly at the bottom of this page. You will also have access to different links we reference and utilize throughout this presentation within the interactive handout. So before we get started, we want to check in with you and see how you're coming into this space. Consider how you're feeling and how this may impact how you navigate through our professional development today. Social emotional check-ins are a good way to start the day with students as well. We want to recognize how they're coming into your learning space because we know how impactful their emotions and life outside of the classroom can be on their learning within the classroom. On the screen, you will see a few Bitmojis. On your interactive handout, take a moment and record which Bitmoji reflects how you're feeling today. So pause the video while you complete this activity.
All right, these are our North Carolina New Teacher Support Program norms. We'd like you to take a minute to read through them and then think about which one you want to focus on today. For example, of the 5 different norms, which are service, results, community, joy, and growth, I'm going to focus on service because I want to assume the best from each of you and our time together. In today's professional development session, we will discuss challenges of building social bonds and inclusion, ways to build social bonds and inclusion in a virtual hybrid or face-to-face classroom, and ways to amplify voices in your classroom. And also how to increase touch points to build social bonds and inclusion. We have 3 curriculum objectives that we would like to meet through today's session. The first objective is to plan and support the variety of learning needs you will encounter in your classroom. The second objective is to build a respectful classroom environment. And finally, the third objective is to actively engage students in the learning by building social bonds and inclusion. Learning in a digital environment, whether you're in a hybrid situation, 100% remote, or just utilizing an LMS like Canvas, or Google Classroom in your classroom, can present many barriers. These barriers or challenges can then affect the growth and learning of our students. Here are some challenges we often face when we're designing our digital learning plans. We learn through our environment, through hands-on activities and being social with our peers, so lack of social and face-to-face can be a barrier to building these social bonds in the digital learning environment. Many students and even adults are very uncomfortable with the features of a digital learning environment. They may not want to turn on their microphone because they don't like to hear the feedback or even hear their own voice. Some are just not as savvy with technology and the features can intimidate them. Going back to our first point, we learn through our environment and being social. When we're in a digital learning environment, it can feel very isolating and there's little camaraderie, which also leads us into the next bullet point, that the digital learning environment makes it hard to see the emotions of our teacher and peers, which is another way in which we learn. Finally, we get to accessibility. This can be seen through access to technology devices, access to Wi-Fi, but it can also mean accessibility to the content within your digital classroom. This information that we've presented here came from research referenced at the end of the presentation, as well as module 2 and 3 of the distance learning playbook. You'll notice in the last bullet, we have links to 2 different websites. The first one is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and Universal Design for Learning. You will have access to these links in your interactive handout. So next we want to think about all of these challenges. Okay, we've created a Jamboard for you, and now we know that we're not meeting synchronously. However, that's the joy of Jamboard, is that we can contribute to it. Then we can also go back to it and see what our peers, our colleagues, and other participants have contributed. So we have 3 different tasks that we want you to do on the Jamboard. And in a minute, we're going to let you pause the video and utilize this Jamboard to think about building social bonds and inclusion in a digital learning environment. So the directions are on each board of the Jamboard, but you'll also see the whole directions on the first board of the Jamboard. Each of the boards on the Jamboard includes one of the 3 questions that you see here on this slide. Okay, you will have access to this Jamboard so that, as I said, you can go back and see what other participants have contributed. And you may also see some connections to the things that we've discussed in this presentation. But the great thing is that you will most likely find some really great takeaways from other participants, and you'll be able to utilize those in your classroom in this upcoming school year. So now we'd like you to pause the video and record your thoughts on the 3 different boards of the Jamboard. You will find the bit.ly for the Jamboard on both your interactive handout, and you will also find it on the slide here underneath the picture. Since we already talked about the challenges, now we want to talk about how we overcome those challenges to building social bonds and inclusion when we're in a digital learning environment. In order to increase those learning connections, you need to allow your students to see you. Okay? Use a screencasting resource like Loom to record your direct instruction lessons, if possible, rather than just pulling already created lessons from YouTube. This will also build your own library of lessons that you can use if you have a substitute, if you have to be out of the class for any reason. But it can also be used when you have students who may need review of material that you've already gone over. You also want to increase their comfort levels. So you want to give students a safe place to practice the features of your LMS and virtual meeting platforms. Walk them through changing the background, or show them how they will get into breakout rooms, how they can mute, how they can turn their camera on and off. You want to go over all these processes and procedures, just like you would when they're face-to-face, and you go over procedures of how to sharpen a pencil or how to ask to go to the bathroom. You also want to utilize the discussion boards in your LMS or back channel resources like YoTeach. Even Padlet and Google Jamboards are a good place for students to interact and collaborate with each other when you're in a digital or even hybrid learning environment. Speaking of hybrid, if you're teaching in a hybrid synchronous classroom, turn your camera on. Okay, we talked earlier about how them seeing your face and seeing your emotions is one way students learn. Now, this can be challenging when you have your own connectivity issues or even hesitations, like we said, about using those features of digital classrooms. But remember how students need to see your emotions and those of their peers to learn. It's also a good idea to take some time to look through the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and the Universal Design for Learning sites to see how you can ensure that your course design includes features that ensure accessibility for all. And finally, some small but very important ways to build social bonds and inclusion in your remote learning environment is to greet students individually as they enter your classroom. Okay, and this is even important in that digital, especially in that digital classroom. And then continue to do so when you come back to face or when you're in a hybrid situation. Okay, building those relationships continues throughout the whole year.
So we've been talking about access challenges and how to overcome some of the other challenges of teaching virtually. Now we're going to talk about strategies to build inclusion within your classroom. And one way to do that is by amplifying all voices and the voices of your students' community. Building inclusion is super important because inclusive classrooms are more likely to have higher attendance, increased engagement, and less behavior issues. So one way to do this is by creating a safe community. We're going to hear from an elementary school teacher that brings guests into our classroom to promote inclusivity. As we hear her speak, we want to think about ways that this could work for you in your classroom.
Hi educators, my name is Isla Tawheed, and whether you are a first year teacher, a veteran teacher, a teacher in charter school, or a teacher in public school, this school year is unlike any we've had before. The pandemic has pushed us into virtual spaces. However, we still need to make sure that the primary focus in our classroom is creating environments where children feel safe. This safe space is a place where learners feel comfortable taking risks and engaging in conversations around the topics of equity and race. This is the exact situation I found myself in my second grade classroom at the end of last year. Oftentimes, when I talk to other early childhood educators, they ask me, Izzy, is it okay to have these conversations with kids that young? Are these topics a little inappropriate for them? And I always answer, not at all. The students can handle it, especially when you've spent the year creating an environment that promotes inclusivity. I set aside a special time of day with my classroom called Miss Tawheed and Friends, and there we invited guests into the virtual space. The students loved it. We talked about various topics, everything from urban farming to anxiety, from cooking to race. Last week, we talked about how little people could make a big change, right? And this week, we want to talk a lot about how we could take care of each other. And just like we sang in a song, right? You can count on me, I can count on you. And people who help us take care of ourselves as well. And so this is my friend, my two friends, and they take care of me in a friendship way, but Teddy also takes care of people in a professional way as a nurse. So he's going to tell you about it, and then you can ask him questions. You can always write in the box if you can't wait. If your question is burning inside of you and you can't wait to say it, just put it in the box, okay? All right, ready to listen? Give him a thumbs up. Yeah, welcome to
If this video is a little bit longer than what we shared with you, and so if you are interested in seeing the whole video, it is linked in your interactive handout. This teacher does give a lot of really great examples of how she uses this in her classroom. So after watching that video, we want you to think about someone who you could invite into your classroom and why having them as a guest would be beneficial to your students. While we're not together synchronously, we also wanted to share a strategy called waterfall with you to think about the topic at hand. So in your classroom, especially in a virtual or hybrid classroom, to do a waterfall, you're going to have all students answer the same question. Like we're asking you to answer, who could you invite into your classroom and how would this be beneficial to your students? And have them type the answer to that question in the chat, but wait to press send until you say waterfall. Once you say waterfall, all of the comments will come flooding into the chat. Waterfall helps build community and inclusion because it provides an opportunity for all students to contribute to the class, while also providing space for them to craft their responses without the pressure of time or their peers. So going back to the topic, we are going to take 1 minute to record in your interactive handout. Who could you bring into your classroom to help build community and inclusivity, and how would this benefit your students? So we're going to start the timer and give you 1 minute to answer this question. All right, hopefully that was enough time for you, but if it wasn't, you are free to pause this video and continue to write down your thoughts before we continue on. So another way to build an inclusive classroom community is to recognize that students have preferred learning styles and preferred communication styles. So one way to capitalize on their preferred learning styles and communication styles is through choice boards. And I love choice boards, but they take a lot of time to create, and sometimes time is just a luxury that teachers don't have. So instead of a large choice board with 9 different options, we can begin more simply with a this or that format. So the table on the screen comes from a blog post from Catlin Tucker, and the blog post is linked in your interactive handout. Here, teachers can provide students with at least one choice between just 2 different options. This requires less time to prepare for, while still giving students a choice, increasing their buy-in in the activity. So for example, if you look at the board on the screen, you could have students choose between reading an article about a topic that you're teaching or listening to a podcast on that same topic. So we're going to take another moment and look through all the different this or that examples. Pause the video when you're ready and record in your interactive handout how could you incorporate student choice and a this or that model into your classroom.
Now I want to think about the opportunities that we have to increase those connections or touch points with students. This is even more important in the digital learning environment than we have ever seen before, and it continues to be important in our face-to-face environment as well. So when we talk about touch points, those touch points include interactions we have with students, the websites we use on our LMS, contact we make with families, and directions we provide for asynchronous learning. When we talk about ways to build and maintain relationships, we have 4 different ways to do that. There are having a system for calling on students and noticing who hasn't participated. There's also making sure that our synchronous learning includes whole group and small group discussions. We also have actively participating in discussions, and finally, pop-up pedagogy, okay? So we have created a Padlet link for you, and you will find that link on the interactive handout. And we would like you to use this link to think about how you maintain those relationships by answering the 4 questions. You'll see the 4 questions on the screen here, but those 4 questions are: what is your system for calling on and noticing students? How can you incorporate more whole group and small group discussions in your lessons? What is the benefit of actively participating in the discussions? And finally, what are ways that we can pop in on our students throughout the week to keep in touch and continue to build social bonds? So that 4th one is that pop-up pedagogy. How can we pop in on them, maybe using Remind or something like that? So we want you to pause the video, and using the Padlet link that you'll find in the interactive handout, write your responses to those 4 questions. You'll notice that the 4 questions are across the top. Make sure that you take some time to go back and see what other participants are contributing, because again, much of what you take away from this, you can hopefully use in your own classroom in this upcoming school year.
Yeah, and Megan, I always love to see what other teachers are doing and what they found success in, because a lot of the times our peers will think of things that we've just never even thought to try.
Absolutely.
All right, so go ahead and pause the video now if you are ready to do that Padlet. And when you're ready, unpause it, and we're going to hashtag it. So what we want to do now is reflect on everything we've been talking about. So think about the challenges in building social bonds and inclusion in the virtual classroom and the new strategies that we've talked about. take a moment and try to write a hashtag to reflect what you've learned today. So remember, the perfect hashtag is going to be memorable, unique, and relevant. So for example, my hashtag was choice is key, because I really do believe that giving students a choice in how they work through content is very impactful on their learning. So again, we're going to ask you to pause the video and in your interactive handout, record your hashtag. The last thing we want to do is we want to leave you with a reminder of your why we're thinking about building community inclusion in our classroom, why we come to work every day and work as hard as we do. And so we're going to take a couple minutes and watch this video.
They asked us to pick a student
that we really believe in.
I
picked you, and I chose you.
And I chose you.
I chose you because every day you have an infectious smile and you always have the greatest attitude.
I knew that you were my student. You were the reason that I come to work every day, every single day.
Because you're so passionate, it just brightens my day every day to know that I get to see you.
And I picked you because I wanted to tell you how much you inspired me every day. Every day you smile, and you make me so happy.
Thank you.
You inspire me to be better.
And you're very special to me.
We were asked to think of a student that we believed in. And Dakota, what I believe about you is that you are amazing, that you have overcome some hard things in your life, and you overcome them with a smile.
I chose you.
I love you to death. I've loved having you in class all last year.
He wanted us to pick someone who we believe in and why we come to work every day, because it's not for the money. And I chose you.
So very proud of the direction that you're going in, and I just think that you have endless possibilities ahead of you.
Our whole class looks to you to make us laugh every single day.
And I just wanted to let you know that I believe in you. You can do anything you put your mind to, and you have a bright future ahead of you, so I chose you.
I believe in you. I love you. I think you guys are the absolute best thing ever. So I want you to know that I believe in you.
I believe in me.
I believe in myself. I believe in myself. I believe in myself. I believe in myself. I believe in myself.
I believe in myself.
I believe in myself.
I believe in myself.
Video gets me every time.
Every time. Every time. All right. So we want to thank you for joining us. Even though it's asynchronously, we wish we could be with you in person, even if it's just synchronously, but we do want to thank you for joining us and watching our presentation. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact Paige or myself. Our email addresses are here on the screen. They're also included in your interactive handout. You will also find our website for our North Carolina New Teacher Support Program linked there in the interactive handout, as well as our Twitter handles that you can follow us on Twitter. So thank you again, and we do wish you all so much luck in the upcoming school year.
Thanks, everyone.